Hello, I hope this video finds you well. Tonight's night 22 in my nightly routine of the Codingbat solution while schools are closed. Tonight we're going to look at sameFirstLast from arrays 1 in Java. Problem states, given an array of ints, return true if the array is length 1 or more and the first element and the last element are equal. So we see here in the first example the first element is 1 and the last element is 3, so it returns false. We see in this one the first element is 1 and the last element is 1, so we return true. And the first element is 1 and the last element is 1, so we return true. Now once you see how to do this, if you don't know how to do it already, you'll recognize it's a pretty straightforward problem. But there are so many rich ideas here to kind of draw out, and it's these little subtleties that are going to really help you when you get into more complex situations. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make an integer called L, and that's going to store the length of nums. You don't have to do this, but I prefer to do this when working with new programmers. It just helps them understand what's happening as opposed to doing calls within calls. So the problem states that it returns true if the array is length 1 or more. I'm going to do this not the best way initially. Some of you will probably call me out right away on this, but let's just bear with me and then we'll clean it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if length is equivalent to 0, I'm going to return false. And then now, below it, I'm going to say if nums at 0, which would be the first element, is equivalent to nums at, and remember, the last element is located at index length minus 1. So if the first element and the last element are equal, we're going to return true, and otherwise we return false. And we hit go, and it works. Okay, let's talk about how we probably should clean this up. Well, the first thing to really talk about is this. Well, if we're returning false if the length is equivalent to 0, the question is, can we take this and include this inside this if statement here? And we can. Well, what we could do instead is check if the length is greater than 0, because if it's greater than 0, then we can do this. Now, I'm going to put it here. If L is greater than 0, and this should work. I hit go, and it seems to work in a lot of cases except here. And this is a subtle idea I want to kind of draw your attention to. When conditional statements are evaluated, if you have an AND statement and the first one evaluates to false, it ignores the second one. But the problem we're having is because we're checking the element first, we're not checking if the length is greater than 0 first, we end up with an array out of bounds here. So what we do is if we take this and we reverse it, if we say, okay, if the length is greater than 0, and it works perfectly fine. And that's because it always evaluates from left to right. So it will evaluate this first and say, is it greater than 0? Yes, and this. And you won't have an index out of bounds error. But if the length is not greater than 0, it doesn't actually evaluate the second part of this AND statement. This is called short-circuiting, and it's really useful. Here's the kind of just the rule to follow. If you want to use a length check inside a conditional statement, always do it first, because it is evaluated from left to right. So now, just to wrap this up, because we can always do this in one line. So all that consists of is noticing that this if statement, if it's true, it returns true, and if it's false, it returns false. So what am I going to do here? Well, I'm going to take this line here. Let's just copy that. And I'll change this if to a return. Put a semicolon at the end. And the other problem I have now is that, remember, I stored the length inside a variable, but I don't have that, so I'm just going to say nums.length and nums.length. And I hit go, and it works. And hopefully you can see here, if you're beginning programming, you're really just trying to figure out how the code works. And I like to think that this is a little cleaner than this. Anyways, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a wonderful evening.